I mean, the algorithms in the social platforms worry me a lot.
Yeah.
The polarization that very obviously happens because we want to hear people who are like us, and we want to have the confirmation bias of only hearing views that are like us. I think it really comes down to two things for me, at least. One is education about that manipulation, essentially.
Yeah.
There's a term that I heard that I really liked called conflict entrepreneurs. There are people who make money from our conflicts, and there are people who have their careers based on us only understanding one story that they are sharing.
Welcome to the Storycraft podcast for storytellers. I'm your host, Meg Adams, and I'm here to help you explore how stories shape our connections. Wondering how stories help you network and advance? Looking to bridge online and face-to-face worlds, foster understanding, and ignite innovation? Look no further. Whether you're a leader, communicator, educator, or just love a good story, join us for actionable insights and real talk with professional storytellers, all aimed at helping you build stronger, better connections. So I wanted to start off by just chatting or talking about your background, your career, and how storytelling has played a role.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career in consulting, actually. I went to school down at Ohio University, go Bobcats, and joined a company called the Monitor Group. We were like a consulting firm. I worked mostly in the pharmaceutical world, so we would help pharma companies launch new drugs and really figure out the story behind what the drug actually did. So it was very focused on patient stories, what kind of life difference was made after this drug or that drug. I did a little bit in the retail space too, and at the same time, my family's company in Cleveland was growing a lot. So I decided maybe I could stop traveling 4 to 5 days a week and instead put down some roots. And my family owns a magazine in the Cleveland area, which was very much based on storytelling. The goal and mission of the magazine really was to help spotlight locally owned businesses and try to help them more meaningfully compete against the Olive Gardens and the Applebee's. Like, no offense to Endless Breadsticks, but the breadsticks from the mom and pop Italian place that can't afford the Main Street location, their breadsticks are way better.
Yeah.
So being able to share those stories from people who don't even think they have a good story, but they've just been baking the same bread that their grandmother baked in her kitchen. And so figuring out what the stories are that people don't even know that they have and turning that into messaging that is real and authentic, to me, that is the best kind of marketing too. It's real, it's true, and it's based in a human lived experience.
Absolutely.
And then now I work at Unify America. And so my path was the magazine. My sister and I founded a local agency in the Akron world to help nonprofits really amplify their missions and tell their stories. And then I learned about a group called Unify America, which is working on depolarization, kind of helping people find shared goals across big and important viewpoint diversity and helping them build civic skills to really be able to solve our public problems better and more collaboratively.
Because we all get along so well, right?
Yeah,
especially during election season. It's so much fun to have those conversations. So as you've been working with Unify America and with all of that storytelling experience that you have, what advice would you give to people who are trying to have better conversations across, especially some of these hot button, social justice issues?
Yes, I love this question. I think one of the things that Unify America really kind of puts our stake in the ground on is starting from a place of shared goals. So if we're talking about a border wall, is it good, is it not good? We're talking about tactics, and we come to the table with already a solution in mind. We forget about the lived experience of the people on the other side of the table, and we also forget that we may have a shared goal in this thing, which maybe 80% of the country could agree that it's good to know who comes in and out of our country if other countries around the world are working with us to make it a more safe place for everybody to live. Like, that might be a goal that we all could get around, and then we could work towards shared solutions instead of just showing up and saying, I have the right answer. Instead, get at the stories that people bring to the table and get at the goals that you actually might share instead of starting from tactics only.
So my students have participated in this project, which is wonderful. Could you tell us a little more about how it's set up, like tactically, like how are you setting it up so that they can come to this idea of a shared interest, but also feel the able to be vulnerable in that state, right? With their story.
Yes, that is so true. So one of the programs that we offered, it's actually the very first one that we started, is called the Unify Challenge. And so basically it looks like, 17 to 20 different topic sentences, and you get paired into this live virtual conversation with a total stranger. In the college market, we pair people from different universities. We also do this at a national scale, where we might pair people who have different ideological beliefs or from different racial backgrounds or have some kind of meaningful difference. And they walk through these shared goal questions together. So one might be, all children are deserving of an education or deserving of kind of being the best version of themselves and having opportunities. And that might be something that I have a very different story about personally than a person who I'm speaking with, but we could have the same shared goal. So we could kind of talk through these goals by providing our own perspectives and realizing that we have very different viewpoints, but we can still share a common goal and share a common kind of vision for the future.
That's amazing. Yeah, and what is your hope that, like, with Unify America as a whole, like, what's your hope that this helps us do, like, on a large scale, right, with essentially sharing stories?
Yeah. So our big vision is really replacing political fighting with collaborative problem solving. And I think if you think about it kind of as a pyramid, at the bottom of that is just being able to have civil conversations and starting from a place of shared goals and being able to say, you have a totally different life experience than I do, but we still might share a vision for the future. Let's look for it. So that's kind of the base of our pyramid that we're working on with things like the Unify Challenge. The next level up is practicing civic skills. We don't learn how to listen. We don't learn how to build consensus. We don't learn what real cooperation on public policies look like. We just don't ever have time to practice this stuff. So we're also working on building this, it's almost like a civic gym where you can go and build some of those muscles that you just don't have an opportunity to practice otherwise. And all of that kind of feeds up into the top of our pyramid. And there is a method of really community problem solving called deliberations. It's a model that's worked across the world, but there's not much of it happening in America right now, where you basically build juries of citizens to come together, figure out what their shared goal is, work through a set of possible shared solutions, and present it back to their fellow community members. It's like, hey, we need better childcare in Akron, Ohio. What about universal pre-K, says the collective juries? And then they can find a way together to move forward on it. So it's this pyramid of civility and civic skills and then better collaborative problem solving.
I think we danced around this in the conversation so far, but what role does storytelling have to play in that piece of helping us collaborate and build community?
Yes, yeah. So for me, storytelling happens at every single level of that pyramid. You can't have civility without understanding the other person's story and being able to reflect on your own. Mm-hmm. How did you come to the kind of value set that you have right now? What is your own story that you're bringing to the conversation? When it comes to civic skills, especially things like being a good listener and coming to a consensus, I think some of the best listening skills are the best storytelling skills. Mm-hmm. Being a person who can engage in the conversation and figure out the signposts of meaning in somebody's conversation is good storytelling. Yeah. And same with the collaborative problem solving world. How can we, for me at least, identifying a problem that you can't tell in story form, if I cannot describe to my kindergartner what the problem is, then I probably don't understand it as well as I should. So starting from a place of story could actually help us communicate to the broad group, community, region, state, country, what the problem looks like, but also what the solutions are.
Love what you're hearing on this podcast? Consider booking me to speak at your next event. Dive further into the transformative power of storytelling with my keynote. Tell better stories, speak up, stand out, and build community. In a world that often amplifies our differences, my talk invites you to embrace genuine connections. Break free from the echo chambers and discover the art of storytelling. Learn how to share your own narrative, listen actively, and foster communities that flourish on shared experiences. Check out the show notes to learn more about how to book a talk for your next event. You said something earlier about us sort of owning our experiences and then being able to communicate that through story. I see so much of what I see and have experienced personally, especially since the pandemic. It feels like it was just very heightened when we were isolated, is people are adapting stories that aren't like their personal experiences. Maybe they're taking as a marketer, they're taking like a marketing message or the story of somebody else, and they're coming to the table, like you said, with this maybe more I have the solution oriented versus I'm going to come and listen to you. Have you seen any of that in your work with the Unify America? And if so, like what are you doing to help people sort of break out of that?
Seems like such an important question to me. It feels like our current political system is good at giving us the stories they want us to hear. The liberal politicians, the conservative politicians, they will give us the stories. They want us to memorize these stories. Then they want us to share these stories with our friends and family who have heard very different stories that don't start from a place of shared goals. So I think one of the things that we're really working towards is to not adapt stories that we have been told, but to instead find our own stories and start from our own lived experiences and recognize the value of other people's stories. That our story or story narratives that we've heard from other people, they might not really share the full picture of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how do you teach people? And I'm asking you, this is a very selfish question. So how do you teach people that while their story is valid and true, that so is someone else's lived experience that is completely unique to them? Right, because that's where we can hopefully come together and come up with these solutions to a lot of the problems. How do we do that?
Yeah, and to me, this is not one of those things that somebody could have told me. I had to experience it. You can't tell me that two heads are better than one. I have to have an experience where I see that two heads are better than one. So I think part of our model is actually giving people examples of this that they can actually live. So something like the Unify Challenge, when I personally did it, I was paired with somebody from a completely different religion, very different life experience, and I left having a different opinion about a specific American issue that I thought I was very grounded in. He changed my mind. He opened my eyes in a way that I thought I was already pretty open on the issues. And nobody could have told me that. I had to do it for myself. I had to really listen to this person's experience and understand that my view is like this when the world is like this. It's probably not very good for a podcast. My view is not narrow. It's quite broad.
If you're listening to this, she's, we're talking about broadening our viewpoints, right? And I think that's, but to me, that is the beauty of a rich, fulfilling life is relationships. And I think anybody who's been in a relationship understands that, whether it's a marriage or a friendship or a family member or a child, that we are all going to have unique life experiences, but there's beauty in that. I don't know how else to say it, but it is tough. And I think like you, Morgan, I was challenged in the past few political cycles where I caught myself doing the same thing, right? Where I'm a storyteller, I'm a rhetorician, whatever, but I'm like, oh no, I was so sure I was right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do we create more experiences? I know you're doing this through Unify America, but for listeners or people who are out there professionally storytelling, how do we invite more of opportunities for this diversified perspective, these experiences to take place?
Yes, I love that. And I mean, this is such an important sector, I think, that is growing in our country too. There's lots of organizations working on bridge building and viewpoint diversity. And some of the big points I think I hear across this chorus of voices. One is, and I've actually learned this from a group called Respect Perspectives that has a challenge that essentially says, take what you believe and try to write an argument for the other side.
Yeah.
Step into their shoes, do research, and really try to write an argument that yourself might disagree with. What is that experience like? You don't have to have a partner for that. You literally are stepping out of your brain and putting on somebody else's for just a second. So I think there's some of that that's don't just try to walk in someone's shoes. Try to sit in who they are and their experience, do the research. The other thing I think that is coming out of a lot of this bridge building work is conversations with people who are not like you. And you can do that in really small ways. You could do that at the grocery store. You can do that in ways that don't feel scary or nervous. Well, maybe they will always feel scary and nervous, but you could do it in ways that don't feel like you have to sit down for an hour and talk with your uncle who you know is going to send your blood pressure up through the roof. You could find these little moments. And I think a big part of coming to those conversations, not with the desire to change somebody's mind, but just with the desire to listen. That conversation is not for them, it's for you to try to understand their perspective and their life experiences. And if you can even have a 15-minute version of that with someone who you thought you just wildly opposed, maybe you still will at the end of the conversation, and maybe you'll also pick up a couple of stories from them that you didn't understand before.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. It's sort of like embodying the openness and the mutual respect and like coming into the conversation willing to listen, but also willing to be wrong, which is like uncomfortable and for a lot of people. But I love the idea, and I hadn't heard that before, Morgan, of like doing that in like bite-sized, like you can have mini moments.
Yes,
you don't need to like take the whole thing under, like convince your uncle, as you said. That's a great piece of advice. Have you had any of those mini moments in your life that have you experienced that?
I don't think I search them out as much as I do now at the Unify world. So we are a very cross-partisan team. We really have to be to have discussions. So I feel like I have these moments every day. And at first that really scared me because I thought, like, am I gonna feel like, the hair on my back of my neck is standing up and I feel anxious and nervous. But I think the second I switched the mindset, at least, of being right and sitting in this truth that I thought was true, and instead to say, I don't have to change anybody's mind. I just have to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
That the act of wanting to understand versus wanting to convince, the second I could switch that, I feel like I find those moments everywhere now where I just want to get a little bit more of your story and turning up your volume a little bit so I could be a better and more active listener. And then also I think it strengthens some of my arguments too.
Sure.
Because I know how to have a better conversation if I know the values that you're bringing to the table that I might have not understood before.
Right. And I'm curious, like switching gears just a little bit, because, you're talking, I think I don't want to assume this, but most of what you're saying would be like in-person conversations. So I know Unify America, you do this online, but it's over Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Is it possible to have these conversations or these mini moments in spaces like on social media, for example? Or we all know, or maybe we don't know, but another issue with this siloing is the algorithms that are feeding us what our ideologies already align with, right? That's an issue, right? That kind of goes back to my earlier question about all the marketing messages that we're getting, and so we're constantly reaffirming things as opposed to having this open mindset. So do you think it's possible? And if so, or if not, like why not? Or how do we do it if so?
I mean, the algorithms in the social platforms worry me a lot.
Yeah.
The polarization that very obviously happens because we want to hear people who are like us, and we want to have the confirmation bias of only hearing views that are like us. I think it really comes down to two things for me, at least. One is education about that manipulation, essentially.
Yeah.
There's a term that I heard that I really liked called conflict entrepreneurs. There are people who make money from our conflicts, and there are people who have their careers based on us only understanding one story that they are sharing. So this idea that so many of these conflict entrepreneurs are trying to manipulate us. And I think the idea of some more education, nobody likes to feel manipulated. And we want to take steps to make sure that we are not being manipulated. So I think the more we talk about that and following those kinds of trails of conflict entrepreneurs that exist all over, especially in social platforms.
Oh, absolutely.
And recognize ourselves as somebody capable of being manipulated. Someone could absolutely manipulate me if I watch their videos every single day on YouTube or TikTok. So thinking about are there any levels of manipulation in my life that I'm blind to, I think is one note.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second is if I value diversity, and I think that is a value that many of us share, and that's something that viewpoint diversity matters to so many Americans. but how are we proving that value in our lives? Are we actually looking for people who are different from us to follow on social? Are we looking for creators who don't look like us? And if we say that's a value that so many of us do, how do we prove it in our lives? So giving people more examples of how to live in a way where you value viewpoint diversity and not just have it as a thing that you say you value.
Right. So like you're living it out.
Exactly.
And that your social feed could be reflective of that, is what you're saying. And I do think I would agree with that, because I think that there are so many creators out there who are doing the bridge work, who are doing the social justice work. And it's sort of a way to like dip your toe in it. You don't have to engage, but you can still listen. Right? You don't have to comment. You don't have to, you can be part of that conversation, but you could also, that's like a very basic entryway into listening.
Yes. And there's some great organizations out there that are thinking about this from a like journalism and storytelling perspective. All Sides is one that comes to mind, where they might show you, hey, here's a big news story. Here's how a left-leaning organization writes their headline. Here's how a right-leaning organization writes their headline. Like, you should know. Here you go. Here's the data.
Yeah, and it's media literacy, right? It's making sure. I love the term conflict entrepreneur, by the way. I'm definitely going to use that, because I'm like, that's exactly what it is.
I got to figure out who to credit that for, because it's not mine, but I love it.
But that's great, because you're, like you said, it's that awareness and I think Kyle and I were having this conversation on the way over here. People almost get tricked into, if there's a lot of money in that, there's people are making tons of money, and it's in fear, right? A lot of it is fear, shame, all those horrible emotions that we feel. Okay, we had to pause the podcast to let you in on this opportunity. If you're ready to elevate your brand storytelling, don't miss our training, Tell Better Stories, led by me, a seasoned television journalist and PR professor, and Kyle, an on-air meteorologist and video storytelling expert. This workshop unveils our secrets to craft compelling, personal-driven narratives that resonate with your audience. Learn our distinct approach that puts people first and brands second, leveraging 6 storytelling elements for maximum impact. Walk away with actionable strategies, tactics, and a clear process to replicate success in any organization. Check out the show notes to learn more about this offer, or reach out to homeplacecreative@gmail.com. So I'm also curious, how do you, in your life, like kind of maintain this openness? Because I think we're like, this sounds like gumdrops and fairies and rainbows. How do we maintain this in situations where we are triggered or we are emotional? Like, what advice would you give to someone who, is in that conversation and it's hard to hold space sometimes in these conversations?
Yes. And it is really easy to talk about all these things.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, check, I should do it. Yes, easy, easy. But the work is hard.
Yeah.
It is really hard. And you're going to mess up all the time. If you put yourself in those vulnerable states, if you put yourself in emotional places, you are going to mess up. I mess up constantly. But the idea of looking at the mess ups as an opportunity for growth. You're never going to get better if you don't experience something painful or a major mess up. And so the idea of being in this space, being vulnerable, but also accepting that you're going to mess up. You will never start this work in a perfect place. Or if you do, like, please go on.
You might not have the right attitude. You might not be doing what you think you're doing. Like if you think you're right.
Yes, that's also true. But I think going
that's great
into
advice.
it, knowing that you're going to mess up and giving yourself that freedom. And I think that also, especially as you're first starting to try to have these conversations, go into it very honestly with like, I'm sure I'm going to say something that's stupid.
Yeah.
I'm just sure I'm going to.
Right.
And thank you in advance for giving me the grace, because I want to get better at this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of like building off of that question, aligning with it, how do you know when to stop? Like maybe when, from your end, this is just not, this is not going to end well. It may not be going anywhere, and I still want to maintain a relationship, right? Because to me, it's always like, I don't want to burn a bridge or break a relationship over something in the conversation.
Yes.
But sometimes people just, if they're not coming with the mindset that you have, and they're just trying to prove you right, you could be talking in circles, right?
Yes. There's a little mantra that we will say at some of the ends of our meetings. It's, may we live our life with kindness, courage, integrity, and may we always choose love. And for me, those 4 things, if those break down in a conversation, if you feel like you're no longer able to choose kindness, or you're no longer able to protect your own integrity, or you don't feel all that courageous in a conversation, or you're not coming at it from a place of love anymore. For me, if any of those 4 things break down, it is your time to say, like, I gotta step away now. To me, those are the bars that if any of those lines get crossed, it's better for you and better for the person you're talking to step away. And there are some conversations that you might not ever be able to approach with all 4 of those things.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's totally okay too. But if you can bring all 4 of those things, you're probably going to have a really good conversation.
That's great. I don't really have any. This was great, Morgan.
Oh,
I don't know. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about in terms of like communicating across these differences and getting out of our silos? And
Yes. Well, as I was thinking about our conversation today, there was one point that I don't think I've been able to make it, that I learned at Unify and didn't have this as a skill, and I'm still working on this skill. But our founder, Harry Nathan Gottlieb, also started Jackbox games, if you've ever played those, and approaches difficult stuff with a sense of fun and humor, and that can be so disarming. If you can approach something in a way that, one, recognizes your own humanity and you can laugh at yourself or laugh together with someone who's different from you, the walls just start crumbling. So using humor and those kinds of like connective tissues of fun, for me, has been really, really eye-opening. And it's a storytelling component that I've never used or known how to use.
Yeah.
And I think getting the infusion of like the fun Jackbox world with so many folks on our staff, it is really making me wish that I knew this storytelling tool before, because it just opened so many doors.
could you give us an example?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we were testing was kind of like a mini little comedy routine that one of our staff members does before having this difficult conversation. So you watch this video of somebody and you chuckle and it's like really cheesy, but then you enter this conversation and the person who's looking at you also just watched this and they're kind of smiling.
Yeah.
Because they just watched this thing that broke a level of ice before they even got in the door. So when you see these 2 faces on the screen, they're both smiling. And you're suddenly like, did you just watch that guy? That was super weird. And then you have this little inside joke that you 2 share because you started with something that, even if it's cheesy as heck, it made you pause and smile and gave you something to connect on.
Oh yeah, and it also like dispels any of that, like awkward tension.
Yes. There's something goofy to talk about. So the tension melts.
That's a great tip. So we have some rapid fire questions. So these questions, don't think, just answer them. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully they're too easy. Okay. So your favorite story, book, movie, film, whatever.
Oh my gosh, The Princess Bride.
Yeah. Yes. we are friends. I watched that movie over and over and over as a kid.
Same. It's the only way my father and I communicate with each other, just lines from The Princess Bride.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, so either and you've given us a ton of this already, Morgan, so thank you, but either the advice that is like so good about storytelling that you want to shout it from the rooftops, or so horrible that you want to make sure nobody ever like does it.
I think I'm going to stick with the humor.
Yeah.
I try to use something that busts down some walls for people and try humor.
I love that. And then what does storytelling mean to you?
Storytelling is like my whole life. Those are my favorite memories as a child. That's how I define so much of my own history. It's through stories. It's the way I want to teach my children. I feel like the better we can be at telling our stories and listening to the stories of other people, the better our country's going to be.
Awesome. Thanks, Morgan.
Yeah.
We're so glad you've listened to this podcast episode. If you liked it, would you mind doing us a favor? Share this episode with someone who would be interested in the topic too. We're on a mission to help everyone become a better storyteller. And don't forget to subscribe to the show to get updated every time we release a new episode. Each and every episode is produced, hosted, and edited by us, Meg and Kyle Adams at Home Place Creative. Happy storytelling.